Okay, so let's look at some applications of the pigeonhole principle. So before that, we'll look at the special case, the one which you all are familiar with of the pigeonhole principle. Okay, so what does that state? It is, so if A is a finite set, and B is a set such that the cardinality of B is, I think I had to write it the other way. Let me write if B is such that cardinality of A is the cardinality of B plus 1. Okay. Then for any function f from A to B, okay, whatever association you take from A to B, okay, there will always be, there exists some A1 and A2 in A which have the same images, right, such that this is exactly what we are familiar with in the usual pigeonhole principle, right? That if you have some n pigeonholes and n plus 1 pigeons, and two of them sit in the same hole, that means they have the same images, right? That's what we are familiar with. How do we prove this? We could always do this in the same way how we proved the other results, but we could use the other results to prove this also. So I will use, you can actually choose, and frankly you could use any of the previous results to prove this, but I will choose and use one of them. So let's see. So we know that there will be some element of B, okay, by a previous result. There will be some B in B. Okay, see, essentially what am I attempting at doing here? You have A and B. I should make a mention that A is not equal to, A1 is not equal to A2. Right? Distinct points in the domain which map to the same elements in the codomain. Okay, so by some previous result, there will be some B in B whose pullback is greater than what? F inverse of B is greater than or equal to what? Cardinality of A upon cardinality of B. But my cardinality of A is cardinality of B plus 1 upon this, right? Which means that you can see numerator is bigger than the denominator. So that means this has to be greater than 1. But this is a natural number greater than 1, or it's an integer greater than 1, an integer greater than 1, an integer strictly greater than 1 has to be at least 2. Right? So therefore, the cardinality of F inverse of B is greater than or equal to 2. That's it. Why? What you will take this A1 and A2 to be? That's the full. What does A1 and A2 will be? Some elements of the set F inverse of B, right? Two distinct elements of the set F inverse of B. So we'll take A1 comma A2 to be in F inverse of B, right? It's a set containing of all the pre-images of B such that A1 is not equal to A2. That's what you do. So therefore, what we have what will be F of A1? B. And what is F of A2? B. That's it. That's how we get it. So that's a generalized form of the pigeonhole principle which you are familiar with. This is the general principle you are familiar with. In fact, as you can see here, I could have repeated the same argument by just making the condition that the cardinality of A is greater than the cardinality of B. In fact, that's all I used. Right? I have just used the fact that the cardinality of A is greater than. That's quite obvious that if I had to just say that the cardinality of A is greater than the cardinality of B, the numerator would be greater than the denominator, and this would be greater than 1, and we would get the exact result. Okay, so it's good to look into the result and see what is the extent to which it actually works. Okay, so a nice approximation theorem, okay, of I would say that this is rational approximations to real numbers is something which we are always interested in, right? Rational approximations of real numbers. Real numbers, generally how to catch hold of. In real analysis, this is one of an important idea, to find rational approximations to real numbers. Okay. To irrational numbers, more specifically, you attempt at finding rational approximation. That's the reason why we look at a certain series for this thing. The series give you rational approximations to real numbers. If you look at the series of pi, truncate the series at some stage, the end stage, that's going to be a rational number. Or if you look at a series of e, truncate it at some stage, that gives you a rational number, right? 1 plus 1 by 1 factorial plus, these are all rational numbers. You sum them up, you're going to get a rational number. You sum it infinitely many times, you'll get an irrational number, but you're summing it up, you see, you get a rational number. So it is interesting to find rational approximations real numbers, because we understand rational numbers better than irrational numbers. Okay, so if you know that we know for a fact that given any real, we can come as close as we want to it with a rational. Okay, what is that called? That's called the density of rationals, right? That's called as the density of rationals in the real line. Okay, so here is one rational approximation theorem. It tells us how close can I come with a specific limit to the denominator. That's interesting. So let's see. So for, in fact, you can come as close as you want. So for any real, any alpha in R, there exist P and Q, there exist integers P and Q, there exist, I want alpha in R and n in n. Okay. There exist P and Q in Z, integers P and Q, such that the denominator I am going to allow to be only between 1 and n. Okay. So it says that you can get a rational approximation of alpha with the denominator between 1 and n, okay, whose distance is less than 1 by qn, okay, and 1 by qn we know is less than n, 1 by n. So you can see it comes as close at least to 1 by n. It's as close to. So if you want to get this thing, then you can get it with allowing the denominator just to run from 1 to n. Okay, anyway, that's the thing, and this is less than 1 by q square also. That's an obvious fact, because we can see that n is greater than q, so 1 by q is less than 1 by n. Okay. That is a mistake there. Okay, so the technique is very interesting. The technique is like this. You would think I would use a heavy amount of real analysis here, but I'm not going to. I'm actually going to use pigeonhole principle to prove this. Okay, so the way we do that is we split the interval 0, 1 into 1 by n subintervals. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So define f from let me say, so this is going to capture q 1 2 up to n plus 1. Okay, I think the difference will be n plus 1. Okay, 2. I'm going to split the 0, 1 into subintervals of length 1 by n. Okay, so like this, 0, 1 by n. What is the next one? 1 by n, 2 by n. Right, we can keep doing this up to we need to go to what is it, n minus 1 by n to n by n, which is 1. And how am I defining this? Yeah, so what is the method of thinking of this is like this. You multiply, you want this to hold, right? So you multiply by q throughout. Q is a positive number. If you multiply by q throughout, you get q times alpha minus qp is less than 1 by n, which means that so it actually tells you that the I think it is the what is that 1 by n, which means that it will tell me, just a second, so it will tell me that p times p, and where is the, just a second, p is a integer, so qp less than 1 by n falls inside one of these. How do I say that? There is a just a second, q times alpha minus p is less than 1 by n. No, actually you can't make that statement, so that is not true. Okay, but let's see how it works. I have a slight wrong idea of intuition. Okay, so anyway, so there are, so how are we defining this? So we are taking f of any element from here we are calling j, so f of j, okay, we will take this to Yeah. So see, we know that if you look at any x, okay, and subtract its integral part from it, okay, if you subtract its integral part from it, this number lies where? In the interval 0, 1, right? I hope everyone agrees with this. If you take x, subtract its integral part, if x is positive or negative, both cases, subtract its integral, because when it's negative, the integral part will become less than this. So this will always be positive. So this quantity lies in 0, 1, which means that this quantity should be in one of these, right? It has to be in exactly one of these, in fact, right? So I'm going to take J to the set. So general this thing for this would be K minus, how do I put it? Yeah, let me write it like this. So I minus 1 by n, comma I by n, if, okay, so if what is it? I want alpha, right? So alpha j minus the integral part of alpha j is in this interval. Is this okay? This will fall. You look at this quantity, right, for j. So I am basically looking at all 1 times alpha, 2 times alpha, 3 times alpha, okay, and you check where they fall, where this falls, the what is it called? We call this as the decimal part. This will become the kind of like the decimal part. So the decimal part of that, you check where it falls, in which of the intervals, send j to the same place. Okay. Now what happens? Something special happens in the domain. The domain has n plus 1 points. The codomain has. It's a well-defined function. There is absolutely no problem with it, right? I hope that's clear. Is it clear how this function is defined? Yeah. So the codomain has how many points in it? N points, right? From 0 to n minus 1, n points, okay? And the domain has n plus 1 points in it. So by the pigeonhole principle, there will be 2 points in the domain which have the same image. Okay, so by the pigeonhole principle, there exist, let me go with j and k are different, so I will put them in such that, let me keep j less than k, we'll see why. They have, I want them different, I can always assume this, such that f of j is equal to f of k. So what does it mean to say that f of j is equal to f of k? It means that their decimal parts lie in the same interval. Okay, so definitely this would mean that the distance between these 2 points, because see, what does this mean? It will mean that their decimal parts, that is alpha times j minus alpha j, this is the greatest integer function, I hope that's clear. Okay, and alpha k minus greatest integer of alpha k, both lie in the same interval. Let me call this as t minus 1 upon n, comma t upon n, okay, just for some t. Okay, so this is the image. So they will both lie in t minus n, 1 by n. So since they both lie inside some interval of length 1 by n, it means that their distance should be less than 1 by n. Right? X and y lie in an interval of length 1 by n, which means that mod of x minus y should be less than 1 by n. Correct? So this will mean that the distance between alpha j, I want it here. So okay. So alpha k minus greatest integer of alpha k. Let me just, yeah, minus alpha j minus greatest integer of alpha j. Okay, this is less than 1 by n, because this length is less than 1 by n. Okay, so this will tell us that, let's combine. We can see we have already caught hold of what P is, or what, yeah, we have caught hold of what Q is. How do I, where is P? Yeah, we have caught hold of what P is also. So you tell me what is P and Q. That's the reason why I found it difficult to get. Okay, so this would be k minus j times alpha, right? Just combine these two, minus, which is the one, yeah. So greatest integer of alpha j minus alpha k less than 1 by n. Okay, so this k minus j is positive. I will choose, can you tell me what P is and what Q is? What will you take P and Q to be? What is Q? K minus j, right? Q is k minus j. And what is P? This portion, right? This is an integer. This is greatest integer and greatest integer, not plus. Why plus? This is fine. This has become plus. So there is a mistake here. This is plus. This has to be positive, plus, I think, right? Is it? How can it be? This is minus. This is plus. Oh, so this would be G. Okay. So what is my P? It is going to be alpha k minus greatest integer of alpha j. This here might be negative or positive. It depends on alpha. Okay. So you choose P to be this, choose Q to be this, and what we have here is that mod of divide throughout by P, because P is a positive number, right? P, K minus J is positive, so that's fine. K minus J is positive, so not P, Q is positive. So divide throughout by this, you'll get P, this P by Q less than 1 upon n times Q. The only question you might ask is, where should Q lie? Between 1 and n. How do you know that Q lies between 1 and n? Where does j and k come from? 1 and n minus 1. Okay. If j and k comes from 1 and n minus 1, the difference of j and k, okay, or the mod of the difference, where can it lie? Yeah, it cannot be 0, so it can be minimum of 1 and maximum of n, because they are distinct. The maximum difference you are going to get is n minus 1 minus 1. That is, if One of them is n minus 1, the other one is 1. That's the maximum possible distance. Any other distance is going to be less than that. The maximum distance you are going to get is going to be n, the distance between n minus 1 and 1. That's the maximum distance, which is n. Anything else is going to be less than that. Okay, if you want, you can prove it algebraically also by making arguments. But so that tells us that. So yeah, so this is something which you need to give a proof to. That what is that? That is Q is in 1, 2 up to n. Here, this is something which you need to prove. It's not difficult to prove. You need to look at what k and j are and make the argument. In fact, so your k lies between 1 and n plus 1, and your j lies between 1 and n plus 1. Okay, you want to look at k minus j. So therefore, your minus j you look at. This will happen. This will lie between minus n plus 1 less than or equal to minus j or equal to minus 1, and then you add throughout, you will get you will actually get this thing, but this is actually positive. So k minus j, because we have taken this k minus j to be positive, right? Where is that? Here, k minus j we have taken to be positive, so this has to be greater than or equal to 1. Okay, otherwise the modulus is what you get there. Anyway, this is less than or equal to, when you add, you're going to get n. That's quite easy to prove this algebraically. Okay, so that proves our statement. So nice rational approximation, what you get. Okay. Or existence. We don't know how to pull out the rational approximation. The proof does not tell us how to pull the rational approximation, but it tells us that there is one. Okay, that gives us the existence, but there is no way, because you are just using the pigeonhole principle to get j and k such that f of j is equal to f of k. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay. So you can go as close as you want with the restriction that the domain is, that the numerator is less than n. That's not. Now, yeah, we can look at a special another case, okay, just for fun, something maybe an infinitary pigeonhole principle. So an infinitary version of the pigeonhole principle. So let A and B be sets such that A is finite, such that A is finite, non-empty finite, okay, let me write here, non-empty finite, and B is infinite. One second. Oh, sorry, I have made a mistake. It's the other way. It is, you want A to be infinite, you want a domain to be bigger, right? Such that A is infinite and B is finite. Okay. Then for any function f from A to B, what can we say? What do you think? Infinite. There will be one pullback which has infinitely many. So there will be an element of B such that there are infinitely many elements of A mapping to it. Right? So that's what you'll have. So there exists a B in B such that the cardinality of F inverse of, or not write like this, F inverse of B is an infinite set. And I think all of you all can give me a proof for this. This is just a fun theorem, but can you give me a proof to this? It just comes from the fact, okay, that you can write A as, so suppose this is not true, suppose every pullback was finite, what would happen? Suppose F inverse of B is finite for every B in B. What will this tell us? What does this tell us about A? Why? Because you can write A as a union of these, right? So we can notice that A can be written as a union of B in B, F inverse of B, right? But B is a finite collection, B is a finite set, right? So this is a finite collection. So this is a finite union of all finite sets. Finite union of finite sets, we know, we have studied in foundations that it has to be finite. Okay? Finite union of finite sets is always going to be finite. So this will tell us that A is finite. Okay? So therefore, A is finite, which obviously just contradicts the fact that A is a infinite set. Okay? So this is just a fun exercise. And here's one other interesting result, another interesting exercise we can prove for, it's an application in number theory, okay, a small application in number theory. Let's see, it's fun, let's see how it is, what is the, so I'll tell you this result. You'll have actually studied a result in number theory which gives you this in a step, but I am not using that result. So you tell me what is that result that actually gives you this. Okay, so let me see. We'll first prove it and then we'll ask that question. So using pigeonhole principle, and let's see to what extent we can generalize this result. Okay, using the pigeonhole principle, show that there exists some n in n such that, okay, if you look at 17 raised to n, okay, if you look at 17 raised to n, it should end with 0, 0, 0, 1. Some 17 raised to n, okay, ends with the the last integers are 0, 0, 0, 1. Okay, ends with so you all know number theory. Can you all convert this problem into something about remainders? What does this say in terms of the remainders? Yeah? What does this say about remainders? Let's be more specific. Yeah? The remainder of 17 raised to n is 1 when divided by 10,000. That's exactly what it says. Okay? The remainder of 17 raised to n is 1 when divided by 10,000. Can you see that? Because if you look at 17 raised to n minus 1, what do you get? If you look at 17 raised to n minus 1, it will end with 0, 0, 0, 0, right? Which means that it has to be divisible by 10,000. If 17 raised to n minus 1 is divisible by 10,000, that means 17 raised to n, right, has remainder 1 when divided by 10,000. Okay, so that means you can see 17 raised to n is some 10,000 times k. 17 raised to n minus 1 is some 10,000 times k. Therefore, 17 raised to n is 10,000 times k plus 1. That's your division algorithm, right? So that has a remainder 1. So let's see how to prove this using the pigeonhole principle. Okay. So again, so I will use the infinitary version of the pigeonhole principle, but you don't need to. You can actually use the regular version if you just change the proof a little. Just for the sake of it, I'm going to use the infinitary version. So define f from the set of integers to what's it I want? Yeah, to 0, 1 up to 9, 9, 9, 9, okay, by you take f of n to the remainder of n, the remainder of 17 raised to n when divided by 10,000. Okay, this is going to be the remainder of 17 raised to n when, in fact, I will just use k here. I'll tell you why later, or you'll realize later. Okay, when divided by 10,000. Okay, now can you see what has happened? See, what are the possible remainders? That's another thing I should ask you. What are the possible remainders of a number when divided by 10,000? Exactly these, right? These are the only possible remainders. 0, 1. The possible remainders when divided by some t is 0 up to t minus 1, right? So the possible remainders of anything when divided by 10,000 is 0 to 9,999, 10,000 minus 1. So this function is very well defined. Okay. Now what we know is that when two numbers, so this is an infinite set, this is a finite set. Therefore, one element should have infinitely many pullbacks. At least one should have infinitely many pullbacks. Okay. Specifically, at least two should be mapped to the same element, right? That's this thing. So I told you there is actually no use. I could just take it from 1 to, you just take one more element than 1,000, because 10,000. You just could go from 1 to 10,001. It would still work. So that's okay. So by use whatever version you want by the pigeonhole principle, there exists some n1 and n2 in n such that f of n1 is equal to f of n2. That means the remainder of 17 raised to n1 is the same as the remainder of 17 raised to n2 when divided by 10,000. But remainders are equal if and only if these two numbers are congruent modulo this thing, right? So I want to use the congruence modulo this thing, otherwise we get into unnecessary calculations. So therefore this tells me that 17 raised to n1, okay, and of course here I could simply put n1 greater than n2. One of them should be distinct, so one of them you make is congruent to 17 raised to n2 modulo 10,000. Okay. Now, here is where you need to know something. If I have Ax is congruent to Ay modulo n, when can I cancel this A's? Yeah? When can I cancel this A's? Any idea? So let's see, what does this mean? This means that n divides A times x minus y, right? So when can I say for sure that n divides x minus y? If the GCD of A and n is 1. Okay. So if the GCD of A and n is 1, then I can cancel them out on both sides of the congruence. Okay. So here, when can I cancel? So there are extra 17s on one side, right? Here there are more 17s than here. 17 into 17 is 17 n1 times, 17 into 17 n2 times. When will I be able to cancel out the 17s on both sides? If 17 and 10,000 is 1. We know that GCD of 17 and 10,000 is 1, right? GCD of 17 and 10,000 is 1 because you all should try. If you can't do it by Euclidean algebra. Okay, so since GCD of 17 and 10,000 is 1, you can keep cancelling out the 17s till you've cancelled out all 17s here, because these are lesser than this, right? So you cancel out all the 17s here, and how many will be left there? Exactly. So therefore 17 raised to n1 minus n2 will be congruent to 1 modulo. That's it. That proves the result. What are the remainder of 17 raised to n1 minus n2 when divided by 10,000? So you take your n to be n1 minus n2, therefore what you will have is 17 raised to n is congruent to 1 modulo 10,000. Okay, this is congruent to 1 modulo 10,000. The remainder of 17 raised to n is 1 when divided by 10,000, and therefore that tells us that 17 raised to n ends with 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Right? That's what it tells us, because when I subtract, it is congruent to 0 modulo 10,000. So when I add it, it will go in the units place. That's exactly what it tells us. So this is how you can prove. Now let's try to ask ourselves, what is so special about this? Can I generalize this any further? Okay. So anyone knows how I could generalize this result? Just by observing. What is special about 17? The GCD with this thing. So in fact, you could go even further to just say that the GCD with 10 is 1. Because if a GCD was the primes that divide 10 and the primes that divide any power of 10 is the same. So as long as I know that the GCD with 10 is 1, it would work, right? So I need not take 17, I can take any number whose GCD with 10 is 1. Okay, that is what gives us. Can I go? Do I need to take 10,000? No, I can take any power of 10. So I can end with as long string of zeros and 1 at the end, right? So the powers of 17 will definitely have if you look at all the powers of 17, they will be some which end with 0, 1, some which end with 0, 0, 0, 1. Of course, if something ends with 0, 0, 0, 1, then it also ends with 0, 1. That's something to keep in mind. It might not, the last digits might not be, previous to that 0, you don't know what is there. That's something which you have to notice. So you can make this as long string of zeros as you want and 1 at the end, with the powers of not just 17, but any number that is relatively prime to 10. That does not have 2 and 5 in its prime factorization. Okay, so that's the thing. Now, anyone knows of any theorem in number theory which gives us this result very easily? So, with this theorem, there is no way we can find out what this n is. Can you see that? We cannot find out what this n is. We only know existence of that because this some existence of n1 minus n1 and n2. From the existence of n1 and n2, we got that. Only existence. There is no way of catching hold of. But actually, in number theory, you have a result which will be able to spot one of these n's. Any idea? Which theorem? Yeah? No. Euclid's theorem? If a and n are relatively prime, then a raised to phi of n. If a and n are relatively prime, then a raised to phi of n is congruent to 1 modulo n, right? That gives us the n. Your n is 10,000 and your a is 17. Just a specific case of the Euclid's algorithm. Okay, so yeah, so I hope you found this interesting. We'll continue next time.